Our next speaker is Libby Swayn from West Vic Dairy. So without further ado, welcome Libby. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I feel like I am following in a very difficult circumstances after that. I'm sorry, it's not going to be nearly so exciting as all that delicious food and wine. So apologies in advance. Thank you very much for having me here today. And yeah, so I'm Libby Swayn from West Vic Dairy, and I'm here to talk to you how our relationship has developed with the Drought Hub and the node here at Southern Farming Systems. And particularly on a project that we've been working on investigating on-farm dairy water security in the Heytesbury region. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to start with, because I'm not sure, there's a couple of you here that I recognise that would know lots about dairy, but perhaps some of you don't know so much. West Vic Dairy is the regional program, development program for Dairy Australia, so one of our rural and research and development corporations that we have. We are a diverse region and we extend from Geelong, so we don't have many farmers quite in Geelong, but just out at Winchelsea we do. We extend across to north to Ballarat, so we've got some farms north of Ballarat, across to the South Australian border, and then we're south along the coast. And the bulk of our farms actually fall sort of between Colac and Warrnambool, and if you put the highway there and you go south, and that's where the bulk of the farms actually occur within the region. The region has 941 farms and they produce 1,800 megalitres of milk. So lots of milk from our region. And in fact, last financial year, West Vic Dairy was actually the Western District region was actually the largest milk producing region in Australia. And so we produced a bit over 23% of the national milk pool was actually produced just in Western Victoria. The industry has a really large economic impact for the region, and so there's about 7,400 jobs that are actually directly associated with the dairy industry. So that's on-farm jobs and then the processing jobs that are associated as well. And then there's an additional 5,000 jobs or just a bit more that are actually attributable to the flow-on effects from the dairy industry. So it's a really big impact on the region. There have been some significant changes to the industry over the last 10 years. And so we've seen a decline in the number of dairy farms, and in sort of 10 to 15 years, that's reduced by over 400. But that's actually not... So what's actually happened is a lot of farms have actually got larger, and so we've got less small farms and there's been consolidation of smaller farms to large farms. Yeah, so... Now I'm going to show you something, and I think you've seen this before today. so nothing new there. But what I did want to talk about was how we've developed a relationship with the drought node and how that's developed. And so we heard that discussion not that long ago about the consultation process, and we were involved in that very initial consultation process. Up in with Southern Farming Systems, with Cam and Brett there, and then from there we went through this process that Cam has spoken to us about today on the drought cycle review and the drinks project that Cam was looking at, and we looked at what were successful farmers doing during periods of drought and in the lead up and the uncertain times. And overall, what we did identify in the overall messaging was that dairy farmers in the region tend to be very proactive during uncertain periods and put actions into place really early to actually lessen the impacts of dry or drought conditions. And it's not only the dairy farmers, but the whole industry does. And the industry provides farmers with lots of resources and support to assist them in making really timely decisions and well-considered decisions, so that they're very sort of aware of and prepared for it. That being said, one thing we did recognise was that what we have seen in the past is during dry periods, parts of Western Victoria do have issues with water security. And so listening to Cam though before, and I just wanted to reflect on this drought matrix, and listening to Cam's discussion before about the broadacre croppers reviewing their matrix, it's probably perfect time for us to review our matrix, given that we are in fairly dry times in our region, as you would be aware. And I thought I'd just run through the importance of water to the dairy industry, because if you don't come from a dairy background, you may not realise of how important water is to the dairy industry. Dairy farms have a really high reliance on a constant supply of water. And that's not only for stock use, but also for the dairy shed. The dairy water requirements of each farm is quite different because it's dependent on the size of the herd, the actual breed of cow that's on the farm, and then as well the style and size of the dairy itself. So water requirements, for example, to wash a dairy plant and yard can vary from 6,500 litres for a small 100-cow dairy to over 55,000 litres for a 900 plus cow herd. So it is quite significant. That's per day. So that's how much water would be needed a day just to wash a plant and wash a yard off potentially. And again, as I mentioned, with each breed of cow can be quite different in their requirements. But if we're looking at a hot day in summer and we've got a nice big Holstein cow like we have at home, they might need 200 litres of water a day just to keep them hydrated. So it is quite a significant amount of water. And as you can see on this table, I put these figures together earlier in the week, and it's a fairly conservative estimation. Probably I've estimated that evaporation from dams is about 20%, but if we're thinking about, depending on the design of the dam and the environmental conditions, that actually could be quite a bit higher in some conditions. Yes, it's dry out there today, but so that's probably not going to be quite the same evaporation. But if you can imagine in the middle of summer with hot winds and that sort of thing. And last night I was with a group of farmers at an event, and we were talking about these dry conditions. And one farmer who does milk a lot of cows, milks over in excess of 1,500 cows, but one day over summer this year had to cut 400,000 litres of water just to keep up with the water requirements for that farm on the day. So yeah, very big requirement within our industry for water. And so that's why I just wanted to put that into context of what we're looking at. The project that we looked at and we identified, we based around the Heytesbury district. For those who don't know our region very well, the Heytesbury region lies between Simpson, Timboon, Cobden and down to the coast. It was a soldier settlement area that was developed in the 1950s and settled in the 1960s. At the time of development, farms were fairly small and they were about 180 acres pretty consistently. Some were slightly bigger and some slightly smaller, but averaged about 180 acres. In that region, all stock and farm water is sourced from runoff and was all stored in dams. Rainfall in that area historically is pretty seasonal. We have very wet winters and springs, tend to have dry summers, and it's reasonably reliable. We're looking, that 800 millimetre, 900 millimetre average is pretty typical for the region. However, things have changed a bit, obviously, and in changing climate, we've had dry seasons, but we've also had unseasonal rain, which has affected the runoff and affected the capacity of dams to fill. And as I go back to what I was mentioning before, at the same time, we've had consolidation of smaller farms into larger holdings, and not always has the infrastructure been updated to keep up with that change. And so without infrastructure improvements, we have seen water shortages on a number of farms in the region. And that was particularly identified, and you can probably see from that little graph, that in 2014-15 we had 2 very dry years, and in 2015 we did experience water shortages throughout the Heytesbury region. Just click through. So the aim of the project that we we pulled together is actually just, at this stage, information gathering. So we're now 8 or 9 years down the track from that period of very dry conditions. And we wondered what had happened in that time to infrastructure on farms. Had there been changes made to increase storage, had there been other options looked at? And so what we wanted to assess was actually what farmers are doing on farm and how they're coping with it. And so what we have done is we've done a farmer survey and also had some industry engagement with key stakeholders. Now, the farmers survey, certainly appreciate the difficulty of doing surveys with farmers, but it was sent out electronically through emails. There was also hard copies at the events we ran and at when we visited farmers, and we also had some one-on-one interviews. And the key stakeholders that we engaged with were the emergency services and the water authorities, as well as the catchment management authorities. It was quite ironic that the survey hit the ground in about April or late April, and just as we were actually coming into another time of water security issues. So the lack of spring rain and then a very late autumn, or one actually might say a winter break that we're getting this year, has seen farmers again experience water shortages within the region. And as I was mentioning last night, I was with a group of farmers, and 2 of those farmers are purchasing up to about $2,000 worth of water a week just to keep their stock watered at the moment. So yeah, so it's an ongoing problem. It's certainly been very interesting to look at. So we're not quite finalised the report. That's getting finalised this week. But we had 49 responses from across the region, which is actually about 1/3 of the farmers in the region. So it was really good to get so much response. The preliminary findings, there was a number of findings that have been put together, but there was a couple that are really highlight, I think. So of concern, we have discovered that about only 17% of farmers actually know their annual water usage. And so if we look at the period now where we've had 8 months of fairly dry conditions with little runoff, if we don't know our annual water usage, how can we have our storages at the right capacity to make sure we've got that 8-month supply if we need it? It's not very common in the Heytesbury region to have that 8-month supply, but yeah, you do need it in a year like this. 50% of farmers have actually increased their on-farm water storage over the last 10 years, and that's mainly due to water security issues that they've had. So that's quite interesting as well. But 61% identified that they actually need to still do further improvements, and some of those have plans to do those improvements, but they have identified that there is actually need to do further improvements on water security. Only 43% of them actually had a plan to manage water shortages at the current time. So, you know, if they ran out today, 43 of them have got a bit of a plan of how to manage that, but the rest don't. So, which is, yeah, again, a bit concerning. What we did find, and we found really interesting, was that the issue is actually broader than we first thought. So we originally had thought, and certainly in 2015, what we had identified was that it was confined to the Heytesbury region. But what we found is that actually there's a number of farms out in the west, out towards Hawkesdale sort of area out that way. There's also farms north of Camperdown, and a number of farms in the Colac region that are have also experienced water shortage this year. So it's obviously a much more widespread issue than we originally thought. Good news is that the emergency service requirements are sustainable, so that's all great to know. So if we do have major issues, there is plenty of emergency services water available. Something else that has been identified from this is that there is changes in land use happening, And there's also changes in the population. So that's going to lead to challenges looking at that supply balance, looking at supply versus demand and how that might be used. So that is something we need to think about in the future. And I'll be perfectly honest, that picture is, and I admitted to the farmer last night, my son works at that dairy farm, and this is one of the farmers who has actually just increased his water storage capacity for next year because he is one of the ones doing the purchasing of the water. And just to finish up and looking at some of the future actions that we recognise need to happen. And again, these need to be reviewed a lot more and a lot more in depth. But we do recognise that there is the need for an increased awareness of farm water usage and supply, and that seems to be across the board. There's also the need for further research to understand the regional picture of supply and demand, and that links particularly in with the need to understand better water security under changing climate conditions, particularly when rainfall might not be not only just as high, but that seasonal effect might have a fairly big bearing on when runoff occurs and how much runoff occurs, because we are very reliant on runoff. And there are other options potentially, but they all have limitations. And so we need to look at those in detail. We need to think about those not only from a financial point of view, but also an environmentally sustainable point of view. So that's something that we're really aware of, and definitely opportunities for some more work down the track. And just in conclusion, I'd just like to thank the collaboration we've been able to have with Southern Farming Systems, with the drought node there, particularly to Brett Ryan and to Cam Nicholson. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we can keep working together in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Libby. We're going to jump straight into our last presentation, and then I'll do a very quick wrap up, and then we can break